The dust rose in small clouds with each step Sarah took down the weathered road that led to the Triple Creek Ranch, and her feet ached something fierce after walking nearly 10 miles in boots that had seen better days, and the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber, and Roshi had been traveling for 3 days now since leaving the city, behind with nothing but a small canvas bag and the clothes on her back, and those clothes told a story. She wished they didn't tell because they were torn at the hem and stained with red dirt from sleeping under bridges, and her hair hung in tangled waves around her shoulders. Sarah was 53 years old, and never in all her years did she imagine she would find herself in such circumstances, but life has a way of humbling even the proudest among us, and she had learned that lesson well over the past 6 months since losing everything. The ranch house came into view as she rounded the bend, and it was a sturdy structure built from logs that had weathered countless storms, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front, and smoke rising gently from the stone chimney, and even from a distance she could see it was a place where honest work was done and honest people lived. 3 men stood near the corral watching a group of horses mill about in the evening light, and they wore the uniform of working ranchers, with their worn jeans and dusty boots and hats that had molded to their heads over years of use, and when they noticed her approaching they straightened up with the natural wariness of men who lived far from town. The tallest of them stepped forward as she drew near, and his face was weathered like old leather, but his eyes held a kindness that made something in Sarah's chest tighten with hope, and he removed his hat in the old-fashioned way that men of his generation had been taught was proper when addressing a lady. "Ma'am," he said, and his voice was like gravel mixed with honey, "can we help you with something?" Sarah stopped a respectful distance away and tried to stand as tall as her tired body would allow, and she was acutely aware of how she must look to these men with her dirty clothes and desperate eyes, but she had come too far to turn back now. "I heard in town that you might be looking for help," she said, and her voice cracked slightly from thirst. "I can cook and clean and mend, and I worked in my family's restaurant for 30 years, so I know my way around a kitchen, and I don't eat much, and I won't cause any trouble." The 3 men exchanged glances, and she could see them taking in her appearance and making their calculations, and she felt shame burn hot in her cheeks, but she held her ground because pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. The tall rancher, whose name she would later learn was Frank, cleared his throat and shifted his weight from one foot to the other, and she could see he was struggling with something, and her heart began to sink because she recognized the look of a man about to deliver bad news. "Well, ma'am," he began slowly, "the thing is, we do need help around here since my wife passed 2 years back, and the cooking and housekeeping have been somewhat neglected, as you might imagine, but—" and here he paused and looked down at his boots. "We can't have someone working in the house who looks like they might be carrying sickness or vermin, and I don't mean any disrespect by saying it, but you understand we have to be careful." Sarah felt the words like a physical blow, and tears sprang to her eyes, unbidden, and she nodded quickly because she did understand, and it was reasonable, and she had no right to expect anything different, but it hurt nonetheless to be reduced to this, to be seen as something unclean and possibly dangerous. "I understand," she managed to say, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry to have bothered you." She turned to go, and had taken perhaps 3 steps, when Frank's voice stopped her. "Hold on now," he said, and there was something different in his tone, something that made her turn back around. "I didn't say we couldn't work something out." He looked at the other 2 men, who nodded slightly, and then he looked back at Sarah, and she could see him working through something in his mind and making a decision that clearly wasn't easy. "There's a bathhouse out back," he said, pointing toward a small structure behind the main house. "It's got hot water and soap and clean towels, and there's a spare room above the barn that's modest but warm, and has a bed and a dresser." He paused and rubbed the back of his neck, and she could see color rising in his weathered cheeks. "Now I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to know I'm asking it with all respect and with no ill intent," he continued. "Would you be willing to go to that bathhouse and wash up properly, and we'll find you some clean clothes that belonged to my late wife, Margaret, and then once you're presentable, we can sit down and discuss the job properly over a hot meal?" Sarah felt relief wash over her so powerful that her knees nearly buckled, and she nodded eagerly and wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Yes, sir," she said. "Yes, I would be grateful for that." "Good," Frank said, and then he did something unexpected, and he smiled at her, and it transformed his entire face. "I'm Frank Thompson, and this is my son David and my brother-in-law Robert, and we're pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Sarah," she said. "Sarah Mitchell." "Well, Miss Sarah," Frank said, "why don't you head on over to that bathhouse and take all the time you need, and I'll have David bring over some of Margaret's things," and they should fit you well enough because you're about her size, and when you're ready, just come on up to the house and we'll have supper waiting." Sarah wanted to thank him, but the words caught in her throat, and all she could do was nod and clutch her small bag tighter and make her way toward the bathhouse on legs that trembled with exhaustion and relief. The bathhouse was simple but clean, with a large metal tub and a wood stove that heated the water, and there were indeed clean towels hanging on pegs and bars of soap that smelled of lavender, and she stood there for a moment just looking at it all and feeling something break open inside her chest. She heard a soft knock and David's voice came through the door. "Ma'am, I'm leaving some clothes here on the bench outside, and there's also some shoes that might fit, and take your time, and we'll see you when you're ready." Sarah waited until she heard his footsteps fade away, and then she opened the door just enough to pull the bundle inside. And when she saw the clothes, her eyes filled with tears again, because they were good clothes, well made and carefully folded, and someone had even included undergarments and stockings. She filled the tub with hot water and undressed slowly, and caught sight of herself in the small mirror on the wall, and hardly recognized the woman staring back at her with her hollow cheeks and frightened eyes, and she looked away quickly because it hurt too much to see what she had become. The water was almost too hot when she first stepped in, but she lowered herself slowly and let the heat seep into her aching muscles and bones, and she took the soap and began to wash away the layers of dirt and despair that had accumulated over weeks of living rough. She washed her hair 3 times until it squeaked clean, and scrubbed her skin until it was pink and raw, and as she worked, she thought about kindness and how it could come from unexpected places, and how Frank Thompson had offered her dignity when he could have simply turned her away. When she finally emerged from the tub, the water was gray and cold, and she felt like a different person, and she dried herself with the soft towels and dressed in Margaret's clothes, and they fit reasonably well, though they hung a bit loose in places where Sarah had lost weight. The dress was a simple blue cotton with small white flowers, and there was a cardigan to go over it, and the shoes were practical brown leather and only slightly too big. And when she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone who looked like a person rather than a vagrant. She took a deep breath and gathered her courage and made her way to the main house and climbed the steps to the porch where Frank was waiting in a rocking chair, and he stood when he saw her, and his face broke into another one of those transforming smiles. "Well, now," he said, "don't you look fine, and I hope the clothes are suitable." "They're perfect," Sarah said, and her voice was stronger now. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. Thompson. It's just Frank," he said, "and you're welcome, and now let's get some food in you, because you look like you haven't had a decent meal in quite some time." The kitchen was large and warm, with a wooden table that could seat 8, and the walls were lined with shelves holding dishes and jars of preserves and dried herbs hanging from the rafters, and Robert was stirring something on the stove that smelled like heaven. They sat her down at the table and brought her beef stew with vegetables and fresh bread with butter, and she had to force herself to eat slowly because her instinct was to devour it all at once. And the 3 men ate with her and made easy conversation about the ranch and the weather and the horses. Not once did they ask her how she had come to be walking down their road in such a state, and she was grateful for that, because she wasn't ready to tell that story yet, and maybe she never would be, and that was her right, and they seemed to understand that. After supper, Frank poured coffee, and they sat around the table, and he explained what the job would entail, and cooking 3 meals a day, and keeping the house clean, and doing the laundry and mending when needed, and in return she would have room and board and a modest wage. "I won't lie to you," Frank said, "it's hard work, and the hours are long, and we're up before dawn, and don't usually settle in until after dark, but we're fair employers, and